Imagine a political system that doesn't just censor you or jail its opponents. Imagine a system that wants to eliminate unpredictability itself. Spontaneity, even the very idea of a private conscience.
It's a terrifying thought. A world where there's no space left between your private opinion and what the state declares as public truth.
And that is precisely the world we're diving into today.
It's the world Hannah Arendt chronicled. She looked at Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia and saw, well, not opposites, not just right versus left.
What did she see then?
She saw two eruptions of the same phenomenon, something she called totalitarianism, a profoundly, terrifyingly unique form of rule.
We believe that some books must be challenged. This critique uses, as appropriate, a step-by-step critical thinking framework that maps claims to evidence.
We also apply an intellectual framework and use benchmarks like the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble to identify ethical asymmetries.
And we'll conclude with a logical analysis for a balanced conclusion.
And for you, listening right now, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book critique.
Our mission today is to really unpack Arendt's central argument, this idea that totalitarianism is logically different from any tyranny that came before.
And to examine the complete ethical collapse she identifies at its very core.
The question she asks is it's brutal. How did ordinary European societies, places with churches, universities, cultured elites,
All the institutions of civilization.
exactly, how did they become fertile ground for regimes that treated entire populations as just raw material for an ideological experiment?
It's deeply uncomfortable, and her central claim is that totalitarianism is a novel form of government. It doesn't play by the old rules.
What do you mean by old rules?
Well, think of a classic tyranny or dictatorship. It focuses its terror on known political opponents. If you stay quiet, if you obey, you're usually safe.
Wait, so Arendt is arguing that even if I'm loyal and I keep my head down, I'm still a potential target in a totalitarian state.
That's the terrifying difference. It's the ideology. The terror isn't just a tool against opponents. It's used against whole populations, regardless of what they do.
Wow.
It's all organized around an ideology that claims to know the ultimate laws of nature, like race or history, like class struggle. And if you belong to a group that ideology has defined as doomed or superfluous,
Then what you personally do or think doesn't matter.
it's completely irrelevant.
Okay, let's unpack her argument. The book is structured in three big movements: anti-Semitism, imperialism, and then totalitarianism.
Right. And she's very clear these are not a simple, A plus B equals C cause and effect.
So what are they?
She uses a metaphor of breaking a crystal. When the political crystal of the nation-state shattered in the early 20th century, these forces, anti-Semitism, imperialism, they were like crystallized elements left behind.
Ready to be combined into something new.
Exactly. They prepared the ground for total rule, but they didn't make it inevitable.
So how did this logic of total domination actually show up? What evidence, what practices does she point to?
She looks at things designed to dissolve human identity. So mass purges based on constantly shifting definitions of who the enemy is.
Yesterday's hero is today's traitor.
Precisely. And the absolute power of the secret police who kind of embody the idea that the law is whatever the movement needs it to be at that moment. But the central piece of evidence for her...
Concentration camps.
Yes, but not just as places of death. Most people see them as factories of death, or calls them something else.
Laboratories.
She sees them as laboratories. The true central institution of total rule, where experiments in completely reshaping human nature become possible.
Some kind of experiment.
With a threefold experiment, she argues. First, you eliminate the legal person by stripping people of their rights, their citizenship. Then you eliminate the moral person by forcing collaboration, destroying any shared sense of decency.
And the final step.
The final step is to eliminate the unique individual altogether, to prove that everything about a human being, their thoughts, their spirit, their spontaneity, is dispensable, superfluous.
That idea, the deliberate attempt to prove human beings are disposable.
Yeah.
It's just horrifying. Let's trace the path she lays out, starting with her first movement. Anti-Semitism.
And she clarifies this was not just age-old religious prejudice.
It was something new.
It was a political transformation. In the late 19th century, Jewish populations were instrumentalized. They became a kind of symbolic internal enemy for the nation-state.
A scapegoat.
A scapegoat for everything, yes. It was a shift from social dislike to a full political ideology. You see it in events like the Dreyfus Affair in France. That's what made this hatred so lethal. It allowed the state to define a group of its own citizens as fundamentally alien.
And her second movement, imperialism, is where this kind of bureaucratic violence gets normalized.
Yes, normalized and practiced on a massive scale, but far from home. Arendt argues that European colonial expansion, especially in Africa, it was governed by remote bureaucracy, by arbitrary decree.
Rule without law.
Rule without law, based on rigid racial hierarchies. This happened far from the public eye back in Europe, and it paved the way for a political mindset that could imagine entire peoples as disposable raw material.
You practice that kind of cruelty overseas, and eventually that mindset contaminates the politics back home.
It was inevitable. It created a playbook for how to manage superfluous populations.
Which brings us to a really crucial part of her claim, the rise of what she calls the masses. How does this connect?
This is a major point for her. The breakdown of the traditional nation-state and its stable class system created this huge population of isolated individuals, the masses.
So people who weren't connected anymore.
Exactly. No longer tied to a stable social class or a political party that actually represented them or even a community. They were politically homeless.
Just alienated, lonely individuals stripped of a shared reality.
And when people are stripped of that sense of belonging, they become incredibly susceptible to any movement that promises a single, all-encompassing explanation for all the chaos.
A movement that offers certainty.
Certainty and meaning, yes. It substitutes loyalty to the movement for a real place in society.
And the key piece of evidence she uses to show this vulnerability. It's the fate of stateless people, isn't it?
Yes. The refugees and minorities created after World War I, when the old empires dissolved. She showed that when you are stripped of citizenship, what she called the right to have rights, you become, in her chilling phrase, superfluous.
And once a group of people is seen as superfluous,
they become the perfect victims for a movement that needs to prove its ideology is true.
Let's transition now to our ethical frameworks. If we measure this system against the golden rule, treat others as you would wish to be treated, it's not just a failure. It feels like a deliberate inversion.
It's the logical destruction of reciprocity. Totalitarian logic doesn't treat people as people, it treats them as functions of a role. Jew, bourgeois, enemy of the people.
An objective enemy.
An objective enemy who must be eliminated, regardless of their individual actions or innocence.
So reciprocity is impossible. The system never asks what you, the individual, would accept. It just tells you what history or nature demands.
And in that world, compassion isn't a virtue. It's condemned as a weakness, because it means you recognize the humanity of someone the ideology says has none.
This is at the heart of the ethical collapse she's talking about. It's a closed loop where believing the party line, even when you know it's a lie, replaces your own moral judgment.
It replaces thinking itself.
Mindful moment. Pause here and consider how propaganda in Arendt's world works. It demands that people accept obvious, verifiable falsehoods, and then rewards their willingness to abandon reality as a test of loyalty to the movement.
That pattern of demanding emotional allegiance at the expense of verifiable fact is not confined to any era. It should make every reader ask which stories today demand that kind of unthinking obedience.
This is exactly the kind of reflection that Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, is built for AI-powered book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts that invite viewers to slow down, question assumptions, and reconnect with rational thought.
Arendt's work really gives us the vocabulary to see how neglecting critical thought becomes an ethical failure long before any overt act of violence.
So if we compare Arendt's analysis to, say, the aspirations in the U.S., preamble justice, domestic tranquility, liberty, what's the warning here?
The warning is that those principles are incredibly fragile. They depend entirely on stable institutions that protect the individual from being reduced to an abstraction.
The moment you start eroding legal protections for minorities, for refugees, for anyone your society deems superfluous,
you're in dangerous territory. It signals an ethical collapse where rights are no longer fundamental, but are contingent on political convenience. They become privileges, not rights.
It seems like the logical thread that connects everything in her book, Anti-Semitism, Imperialism, the Final Totalitarian State, is this devastating theme of superfluousness.
That is the core logical step. Once people can be made killable or deportable without any moral or political consequence, they've lost their place in the world.
And her analysis of the camps as the true central institution follows directly from that.
It does. Once people are made politically and morally superfluous, the experiments to dissolve human identity become not just possible, but logically necessary to prove that the ideology was right all along.
Now, for a balanced critique, we have to acknowledge that her pairing of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia has been challenged over the years.
It has, and for good reason. Critics point out that she sometimes underplays specific economic factors. Stalin's Russia was trying to industrialize at a brutal pace.
Which was different from the Nazi project.
Very different. Theirs was a project of racial extermination. Others contest the direct pairing because the ideologies themselves were different, one based on class, the other on race. And that's a fair point of debate.
So, given those critiques, why does this book remain so logically robust, so essential?
Because it achieves its main goal. It gives us a new category of thought. It clearly distinguishes totalitarianism from regular authoritarianism.
It carves out a new definition.
Yes, and it grounds that definition in concrete historical practices like terror against non-opponents. It provides a political theory to explain a new kind of institutional nightmare, and that's why it endures.
For us today, what's the most unsettling aspect of her work? It's not just a history lesson.
No, it's her view that totalitarian potentials aren't gone. They aren't confined to one country or one time. They can arise wherever certain conditions come together.
Which are?
Profound loneliness, the loss of a shared, verifiable reality, and a growing contempt for the rule of law. That combination of inner isolation and outer institutional decay, that's the danger zone.
And she has a powerful warning about our own complicity. When we retreat from public life, when we start accepting convenient cliches instead of actually thinking.
We become complicit. When you accept an ideological cliche because it's easy or it makes you feel certain, you are helping to destroy the public space where real debate can happen.
That slide from manipulation into terror is terrifyingly short.
And the only real defense against it is the act of thinking itself.
So this deep dive really ends with a call to action. But it's an intellectual one, a civic one.
Absolutely. Arendt frames sustained critical thinking as a form of resistance. The book challenges you to question certainties, to defend a world of many perspectives, and to protect the institutions that ground both our rights and objective truth. To engage with her work is to engage in the highest aspirations of democratic life.
This critique draws on a systematic framework that maps major claims to textual and historical evidence, applies critical thinking standards derived from modern work on reasoning, and situates the book within a broader intellectual tradition of political and ethical analysis.
It incorporates ethical benchmarks such as reciprocity and constitutional ideals, while aiming for balanced evaluation of both the strength and limits of Arendt's arguments as interpreted by contemporary scholarship.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis.
Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.